Hello and welcome to Creative Walks episode 26. This is Pedro Bonatto, and today I wanted to talk about learning as an adult, and more specifically, learning as an artist. And this thought came to me today because I was playing online with my nephews, as I do from time to time. They are in that age of 8 to 13, where they spend their whole time in virtual worlds like Minecraft and Fortnite and Roblox. So since I am about 8,000 miles away, I often try to call them on Skype and then just play the games that they like to play to be present in their lives. So today we started playing a game we haven't played before, and I just was amazed how they learn things and how they learn by watching people play, which I always thought fascinating, always made me feel like what kids call today a boomer, because I certainly haven't done that. It's a phenomenon for the last, 10 years, or at least since there is YouTubers. But I must say it's very interesting because they're actually learning how to do things, and over time they get very sophisticated. And I saw that today. They wanted to know how to do certain things at a specific game, and they quickly went on YouTube, did a search, saw what they needed to know how to do, and then they went back to the game. And that happened multiple times throughout a couple of hours. And even though all the four of us were beginning from scratch, they actually got much better at the game than I was, just because they had this habit of going on YouTube and searching for things. And that got me thinking about how we learn things as adults and how that differs from when we were kids, and how today's technology and opportunities can help us so much more. And then I started thinking about how I used to learn things, and I even remember, since I'm from the age before the internet, I remember us getting CD-ROMs with like the Microsoft Encyclopedia or Barça or things like that. And then being very disillusioned by education during my undergrad. And then when I started doing other things, how I was learning on my own, but I could never find really a system. And to be fair, there was not the amount of content freely available or even paid in an organized way to start learning. And I was remembering that literally 10 years ago, I was beginning my master's. I did a master's at OCAD University in Canada, in Toronto. And I started learning about design. I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. I was interested in design, and every class in that particular university, and I know it's very common in many places, the master's doesn't teach you skills. They will teach you to, pardon my language, BS about critical theory and postmodernism and all that nonsense. But I actually was able to learn during my master's, and I was able to learn that through two different sources. One was a website called Creative Live, that they had a lot of classes about photography. It was mainly photography back then. This is 2011-12. And I learned so much by actually watching some of the best photographers do their work, which is very much similar to what my nephews were doing with gaming. I also learned from another website called lynda.com, and I think it's not live anymore. I think LinkedIn bought it, but it was freely available with university library card. You could have access to any classes. So I went there if I needed to learn a specific software like Cinema 4D because I wanted to do some 3D experiments. I went there and I spent few hours learning the basics and then playing around with the things. But I started thinking about how we as artists can learn and how we can sustain learning throughout time, and what kind of things we should all learn and know as artists. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that, well, of course, Google is your friend, and sometimes people actually don't use search the way that they can, which is, how do I do X? It seems obvious, but I've seen so many people asking me specific things in photography or in music, and they are literally freely available in high quality by some of the best people in the world if you just Google it, or if you put it on YouTube, which is the second largest search engine in the world. Another thing you can do if you're interested in more abstract subjects is to learn them through audiobooks and podcasts. And that, of course, will vary depending on your interest. And I think podcasts, because of the very nature, the serialized nature of them, you end up learning a lot of things sort of by accident. Like if you go and you learn and you are interested, say, for example, in creative writing, or if you're interested, let's say, in screenwriting, you can actually get the podcasts from people in the field where they are discussing the minutiae of what to do when you're creating, for example, a screenplay. And that actually is how I got reintroduced to photography, and specifically into lighting with studio lights. When I started learning photography, I did an actual course. I went and I learned how to develop film and how to take photos, and learned all about ISO and f-stops and all that jazz. But I remember how I had to literally go for 30 minutes on a bus and go to the library and learn a little bit about lighting. And because it was film times, you didn't have the instant feedback that you have now, where you take a photo and you see if it worked or not. So if you were using a strobe, for example, which is basically a fancy flash that you use in studio, you would have to take the photo and write down what kind of exposure and what kind of details about the photo you took. And then whenever you would develop the film, you'd have to go and see what you did and what you did right and what you did wrong. That was why I was very intimidated to learn how to do flash photography and learn how to do photos with strobes. That's back before I actually reinvented myself and decided to become a professional photographer. But I actually decided to get into lighting in learning photography properly when I was doing my master's. First, because I had access to the photography studios at the university, which very few people were actually using. And I got access to this website called Creative Live, and I could see how people were lighting things. But the inspiration for this actually came from me learning to play drums, which today is my second profession as a musician. And I was playing Arabic drums. That was just for fun, as I mentioned before in this podcast. But that was something that was very hard to do, and I was going to classes every week. And I was getting better and better. And then we had these student gala shows where you actually had to learn and perform. And I think even though music and photography are actually very different fields, the transferable skill of meta learning, learning how to learn, was actually what inspired me to get into photography in the way that I do it today. It came from drumming. That happened because I was doing these gala shows and learning. And then at some point, I listened to a recording of me playing in the beginning, and then as I was playing afterwards. And I was like, oh, I actually learned how to do this to a decent extent. And why not apply the same idea of going on YouTube and learning, or partnering with other artists and trying to see what they're doing, or asking questions to experts, or at least people a few steps above me. In my case, it was getting to know the technicians at university, which were usually part-timers, and they had their own practices. And so I went to the photo studios and learned all I could from those guys. Then I started thinking about other things that I learned over the last 4 years or 5 years, and how I learned them, and then how I was able to get to at least if not a mastery, at least a proficiency at certain areas. And I think there is some lessons in that approach of learning, which is what I want to share with you. So let me just give you a brief summary of the things that I learned over the past few years. One was when I was creating my band, the Blue Dot Ensemble, I actually had to learn how to record and to mix audio for music. And that was something that I was not expecting to do, because it seemed very hard and very daunting. And in the end, it turned out that a lot of the tools, if you know Photoshop, a lot of the tools that are used in Photoshop, because you're dealing with light waves, they sort of they have something to do with the light wave, the sound waves of music. And that was very interesting. The other thing I learned was how to do video, because I had some requests from friends and even from my wife to go and record some things for her. So I decided, I actually want to learn how to do video. Before, I had this idea of doing cinema, and then I sort of fell out of love with that, and that's a subject for another day. But I actually learned how to do videos using my camera by literally going online, getting a book, and trying to figure out how to do it. Then at some point, I had this, and now I have to learn how to do editing video, that is. And that was another process that I had to go through to learn. I am not a good editor by any stretch of the imagination compared to people that actually do it really, really nicely. But I can put a video together fairly quickly today, and I know the steps, and I know what kind of skill I can have to increase that. But it is in cruise control right now. It's something I can do. It's like writing a text. I may not be a poet, but I can write. Another thing I had to learn was, given the limitations that I had for certain projects, including podcast recordings and recording classes and things like that, was that I didn't have the best microphone to record things. And I ended up having to learn a lot about how to clean up audio, meaning there is a lot of, you probably saw, whenever you have a person kind of far away from a microphone, it gets this noise that is an intrinsic noise from the electronics, and I had to learn how to do that. Then I learned how to create an e-commerce website, and I learned even a little bit of how to design clothes, and those things were for another project that I was working, and those things were all very intimidating to learn at first. But then I started thinking, and I started getting used to the idea, okay, I have to go learn this thing now. There's a lot of advantages to learning a bunch of things that you're not used to. First, it's a health thing that it's called arborization. I even mentioned this in another podcast, which is basically a fancy word that brings scientists talk about. When you start learning new things, there is this tree-like branching of connections that happen literally physically in your brain. And the more things you learn, the more connections you can make. And that is a very useful and interesting and fun thing when you get to do it. Of course, once you get to a certain level, you are able to outsource a lot of those things that you want to get done. For example, cleaning up audio or editing video or doing whatever thing that you don't see as the core aspect of your practice. And you can go too far in learning things that will not benefit directly your art, both in terms of business or in terms of your artistic endeavors. But as a whole, I think it's very, very useful to get into the habit of looking for answers and not being intimidated by trying to find the answer. And that made me think of this idea that the masters of painting, for example, I'm very interested in the Renaissance and then up to the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, when you have these Renaissance people, so to speak, that they know a lot about different kinds of subjects. And you kind of can see how they think and how they approach to their arts. But even when you get a person that is very specialized, say, for example, those master painters from the 18th, 19th century, one thing that I noticed is that they actually didn't not only know how to paint, but they actually knew a little bit about chemistry, because they needed to actually make the paints that they would use. They would have to learn a little bit about carpentry, because they would have to go and cut the wood and stretch the canvas and do all sorts of things. And today you just go to the store and you buy those things. And I think you being able to deal with all these different kinds of subjects that are related to your field, they will enrich the field itself. So a couple of things that I wanted to mention as practical things that are meant, who I'm thinking for this is all my friends who are either beginning artists or they're already working artists, but they're struggling because they need certain skills to do certain projects and they don't have it. So they're trying to either coerce some of their friends to do the work for them. If it's like, if you're a musician and you need a video, I know that very well, how people come to me to ask to do certain things. But I think not being able to do certain things as an artist is a handicap. It's absolutely unacceptable, and you should consider that for yourself. And that excuse that you may have that, oh, I have to focus on my art and be the best at this, and having other people do this, admin or other kinds of work, that's a very normal excuse. However, I think if you are in that sense that I'm talking about, a beginning artist, or if you're in your, let's say, mid-career, you will get a lot of advantages by actually spending a few hours and learning a few things. For example, I have a few musician friends who not only don't know how to mix audio, but they don't know how to do a simple video. And I think that's unacceptable in 2020. And so here is a few things that I think every artist should be able to do and should know. Again, this is just my opinion, and take it with a grain of salt. And I've just started thinking about those things, but I think it's something to consider. First, you need to know how to make a website, even if it is on not necessarily WordPress because it's kind of hard, but if you go to Wix or whatever other kind of a provider that there are simple ways of doing it. They're not that simple. It's still an annoying task in a lot of senses, but making a simple website should not be a deterrent for you. It's like not knowing how to write. The other thing I think every artist should know is to do basic audio and basic video editing. You should also know, and that I'm biased for that because I'm thinking you should know photography, but it has become such a central part of our lives that if you learn it, you'll actually have an unfair advantage over your competitors. They're still struggling to find a photographer to do their portrait, when you can actually do a selfie and get a decent job at it, or at least learn how to put your camera on timer and deal with natural window light, for example. And the other thing is that you need about 30 to 40 hours to master any of these things to a basic level. That doesn't mean you're going to be doing incredible 3D surround sound things in audio, for example, but you will know how to take audio from your phone, clean it up, and put it somewhere, or do a simple video where you are explaining something about your artwork. So I think those skills, photography, video, and audio, at least to a basic level, they should be as required as learning how to read, for example. So a couple of things about that. I think when you learn as an artist, and any person for that matter, but specifically for artists, it should be project-based. That means when you decide to learn a new skill, you should have a creative project attached to it. For example, if you are a musician and you want to do a simple video of you playing, that's your project. So you have to learn video, you have to learn audio, and you're going to record one song and put it on your website. Seems like a simple thing to do. People do that every day when you're 14 or 13. And for some reason, for the 20-somethings or 30-something or 40-something musicians, it seems like a daunting task that needs to be a super production, right? But the advantage of doing it project-based is that first you'll get accountable because you have to deliver the project. But most importantly is that the project will show what your focus is, meaning the project will give you your syllabus. When you learn as an adult, you are actually having to fight all those pre-programmed ideas that you learned in school that you hate doing this and you want to go play. Now you actually learn to learn. So if you want to learn that skill, you have to bypass that mode of thinking of, oh, this has educational value, I'm not going to pay attention to it. So that's a joke from The Simpsons, I think. So I think the project is the key to show what you need to learn. And that's coming back to the original idea that I was talking about with my nephews, how they were they wanted to, for example, conquer this castle in this place or get this specific weapon in the game, they go on YouTube, they learn how to do that, and they come back to the game. So they still don't have a general view of all that is possible there, but they have contextualized knowledge. And I think that's the best way to learn when you are an artist. The other thing I wanted to mention was and I think I mentioned this in another episode back in the beginning, is my advice is to actually, if you can, partner with another artist or a person that has the skill that you need. If you're a person that needs someone to hand hold you and take you there, it may be actually faster for you to learn that. So instead of trying to convince this photographer to do a photo for you for $100, partner with them to trade skills so that you're not necessarily investing a lot of money on the endeavor, but you're giving them back something and then they are teaching you something. There is one disadvantage to this, that is not every practitioner is a good teacher. So be aware of that. It may be an issue, but it is a good way at least to get started, because that person will have had at least a few hundred hours of thinking about that problem, and then they will say, okay, you can learn it here or you can learn it there. And also it will help you make better questions that you might otherwise not be able to come up with if you didn't have that person. Finally, I would recommend that everybody learn a musical instrument. I'm partial to drums because it's actually simpler to start learning and start getting something going. But it can be anything that you like, mostly because I think it taps into the inherent structures of the brain, and it will help you hear music in a totally different way. And that will actually open up a whole new world of music. It will make your understanding of music, will make your taste for music grow as well. And I think everybody should learn how to draw. That's something that I haven't started properly yet, but that's something that I certainly would like to do after I learn Russian, which is my menace for the moment. But I think you should always be trying to learn things that are very difficult and, for example, that are at the edge of your ability in your own field. For example, in photography, I want to learn some elements of scene design in 3D so I can insert some of my 2D photographs in a 3D space, and some more advanced compositing techniques, meaning putting one photograph inside another photograph to create a seamless image. That's at the edge of what I'm learning. At the same time, I think it's important to feel like a beginner all the time, in the sense that you are being humbled by, I'm actually a complete beginner on this field, and you get that jolt of excitement when you actually start getting better. Because whenever you are at a certain level at your career, those leaps will come in jumps, and sometimes they take a long, long time. Sometimes you are stuck at a certain plateau for 1 or 2 or 3 years, and it takes sometimes you're learning something simple or something that has nothing to do with your main activity. And that thing will actually inspire you to see your area anew, in a new approach. So that's it for today. Sorry, it's a little bit longer than usual, but I hope you find this useful and interesting. As always, you can hit me up at Pedro Bonatto with 2 T's on all social media. And I just started thinking about this, and I would be curious to hear what you think that are essential skills that any artist should know. And I will talk to you tomorrow.